Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kiernan.
Oh, Ryan, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm just so excited to talk to you. We're planning Louisville. Within a month of the trip we're going to take together. We're going to our first national park together. And God, I just feel like your spirit is closer than normal. I feel it's only right for me to ask, where are you right now?
I am in Ocean City, Maryland, West Ocean City, Maryland.
Oh, my God. So there's almost no need for the Judy alert. We'll get to the Judy alert in a second. I just needed a little preview. The other reason I'm so excited, Ryan, is because today I get to talk to you about a Spanish-speaking area destination that you actually haven't been to.
I'm just so happy I don't have to pronounce things. So I'm just going to sit back.
The whole audience is happy for that. And I've been practicing getting my accent. You know, my son Charlie's in a Spanish immersion school, so I could always just ask him. He can't read, but I can ask him and he can help me. Yeah, no,
his accent is on point.
So today this is one of those episodes that, it's been on our list since the inception of Out of Office. And we're going to talk about a country guide, sort of a country 101 to visiting Guatemala, which is one of the most interesting places I've been. It was super fun to prepare the episode, and I can't wait to share it with you and compare it to some of your experiences in these areas that have, a very complicated history of Spanish colonial imperialism.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's interesting. Guatemala obviously has that history. They have the history of the Civil War. I don't know a ton about Guatemala. That's why I'm excited to hear from you. But this has long been on my list, Kiernan.
Well, I am 100% sure by the end of this, you're going to be completely convinced to book this. I'm going to guess in the next year, and this will be a great introductory guide. So, Ryan, I do. Well, also, I should tease you just to whet your appetite even a little bit more. A lot of Catholic stuff coming.
That's good. I anticipated a bit of Catholic stuff from the title of the episode.
Now, Ryan, why don't we begin with the Judy alert? I want to explore a little bit more about the fact that you are back in the United States. So the Judy alert, of course, not as needed this episode, but this is where I make sure to ask you exactly where you are, because you're not great at keeping in touch with your mom, Judy. She's an avid listener of the podcast. She sends me texts and emails thanking me for this service that we provide. Ryan, you're in Maryland. So you're back in the United States. How long are you going to be here for?
I'm here for like a month and a half because
goodness.
Going up to New York, going up to Boston.
I forgot I'm going to see you before our trip.
And then I hear we're going to Louisville. So
we're going to Louisville.
So you've got me back in the U.S. for a month. They let me in, no problem. It was, they were like, hey, we remember you. And
vaguely.
But it's good. I'm back here in the Eastern Shore, and I'm, spending the week in my mom's Airbnb.
Oh, you know what? I totally forgot she's got that going on. Well, that's good. And do you have any big plans? I know you love the tourist attractions back in your hometown, and the Maryland coast seems like a great time to be there.
Yeah, well, we had talked about the James Beard Foundation a few episodes ago. So I'm going to this place called One Coastal. Actually going there tonight with mom. And so that'll be fun. That was on the list. And then going to my favorite crab shack, this place called Red Roost. And it used to be like a farm. And it is, they just pour buckets of crabs just right in front of you. That's like,
that sounds great.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So that's my tourist experiences here. The weather's nice. It's not like summer yet, but it's like getting close.
Yeah, you're getting pre-tourist season. This is perfect.
Exactly.
And for those that are interested, maybe heading to Maryland or looking for a side adventure destination, maybe not adventure, but beach destination this summer, you got a great episode. It's proven weirdly popular, all about attractions in Maryland and, the resort town that you grew up in with your several homes. I know you had the main house and then you had a beach house, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the beach house and yeah. The pas de terre.
Well, Ryan, before we also dig into the meat of the episode, these country guides are always super heavy. So I want to make sure we get there soon. But beyond the Judy alert, we've got a very important quest for Rick Steves update. So let's head into that. This is, of course, we haven't renamed it. I mean, the quest for Rick Steves, we finished the quest. The Rick Steves came on the show, friend of the podcast, Rick Steves. But you know me, I like to have my hand on the pulse of all things Rick Steves and bring it here to the episode because we have so many. We're more or less a Rick Steves podcast. Actually,
he told us we're not allowed to say that.
Well, I think the judge told me I'm not allowed to say that. But actually, Ryan, this is a good idea. We should bank if we decide to go the Patreon route. Is what if we did a whole series of commentaries on Rick Steves' PBS specials, where we do the rewatches and recaps for the audience, like people do for like Saved by the Bell and The West Wing and Sopranos.
I think our audience would really appreciate that.
It's pretty good. The quest for Rick Steves. This is just last week. There was a great. I almost said expose. There was a great article. He participated, so not exactly an expose. In the Washington Post travel section, all about Rick Steves. It feels to me like a little bit of the follow-up of some of the reporting the New York Times has done, but it's called The Rick Steves Guide to Life. And the kind of teaser of it is that there's a lot more to this complex man than just his avuncular TV personality. And so the author, Natalie Compton, goes. She spends time with him in Edmonds, Washington. And not a ton of new material in here that a Ricknick wasn't familiar with, but there were tidbits. She talks a bit about she gets into how musical he is, which is something that a lot of people became aware of because of his content during the pandemic when he was at home and he would often play the piano. But, she name checked that he was in the Husky Marching Band. I didn't know that name, so I was glad to get that fact. And then she talks about some of his travel outside of Europe, which I'm always interested to hear about because so much of his public personality is about Europe as the stepping stone for Americans to go out and explore the world. So she talks about early trips to Turkey, Nepal, Afghanistan. And then she gets into his politics quite a lot. He's a very outspoken weed advocate. He's pretty anti-Donald Trump. And so just fascinating to get a more well-rounded view of who Rick Steves is, and especially where he is in life, where, he's obviously a very successful person. And I think you get the sense that he's thinking about the legacy he's leaving behind, both at home in Edmonds and through opening up travel to Europe.
I really like the video that came along with this.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was super well produced. Yeah. There's a lot of lovely photography on it, and it gives you some ideas of what his home looks like. And yeah, it's fun. It's a great read, very fast read. So we'll link to it in the show notes, and I'll make sure to let the Rick Steves PR people know that we're continuing to shill on behalf of the company.
Yes, please do.
All right, Ryan. Well, I think with that, we've got no time to spare. It is time. I hope you're packed. I know you always check a bag. You're going to need a lot of gear because we're heading to Guatemala.
Tell the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
All right, Ryan. Now, I am curious, given you've traveled so extensively in South America and Central America, especially in the last couple of years, is there like a particular reason you haven't gotten to Guatemala yet? Or are you kind of banking it? I'm interested what you've heard.
No, so I have a good friend named Walter, who is his family is from Guatemala. So he has been teasing me with a trip to Guatemala for quite some time, and we haven't gone yet. But I'm waiting for him because he has a house there. They know the country really well, so it would be like an insider's trip. So that's why I haven't been. But if he doesn't come through next year, I'm saying it. I'm gonna have to now use your guide and go.
Well, I have a feeling. Yeah, I mean, he's a local. He's going to understand more than I do. But what I do want to make clear, I took what is basically, Catherine and I went for about 2 weeks. We did stick to the more traditional kind of tourist path, and so. I just want to, make that clear. Guatemala is a very diverse, significantly sized country. But there is good reason to stay on the tourist path. And I'll be interested whenever you end up there to hear if you're able to kind of get off that path, because you're going to have a local connection. And the reason that I say that specifically to Guatemala is that this is one of the destinations, we're not often talking about destinations in terms of risk, but there is a fair amount of danger in Guatemala if you get off that tourist path. And even on the tourist path, you do want to be a bit more cautious and stick to the places where, there are safety precautions that you can take. We'll link in the show notes to the U.S. State Department's guidance on visiting Guatemala. I mean, I can just read you the first sentence here, which will give you a sense of why the tourist track is an important place to stay. Violent crimes such as extortion, murder, armed robbery, carjacking, narcotics trafficking, and gang activity are common in Guatemala. Local police may lack the resources to respond effectively to criminal incidences. So, it is just a place that you want to go in eyes open and take those precautions more seriously. Check the State Department website before you book and go, because the political situation and the crime situation in Guatemala can be unpredictable. And I will say it was like one of the places that I, even as a pretty intrepid traveler, I watched myself a little more closely. I mean, you and I have made jokes about how when like travel books say about pickpocketing in Europe and things, here it's to be taken a little more seriously. And why? It's reflective of a really, a very sad and difficult history that really goes back to Spanish colonialism and racism against the native Mayan people. And there was a huge civil war in all the way up to 1996. I mean, the date that it begins kind of fluctuates based on what summary you're reading. But from the 60s, when the CIA was involved in installing a military dictator there, many people have said there were basically genocides of the Mayan people. And so that complicated history, resulted in the death of 200,000 Guatemalans. And so it's something that I would encourage, if you're going to go to Guatemala, take the time to dig into that history a bit. I will say it is complicated because the dictator, the presidency changed so many times with so many different agendas. There were bad actors who were corporate in trying to manipulate the population.
This is the situation, right? Like
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And then as a result, there were guerrilla warriors who were, there was guerrilla warfare from the indigenous population, which of course escalated the violence, and then crackdowns from the state, and just a non-virtuous cycle. What's good today is that it's not actively a place of civil war, but this crime has basically filled that gap, and the country's not in a peaceful situation. That said, the three destinations we're going to talk about, Guatemala City, Antigua, and Lake Atitlan, these do have tourist infrastructure in place. Guatemala City, a tiny bit less touristed. Many people just come into Guatemala City and head out to Antigua and Lake Atitlan. But you especially want to be sure that when you're hiring a local guide or commissioning a car or a boat as you get around, you do want to ask a few questions. You don't want to carry around lots of cash or show that you have, be showy about your wealth. And you are going to stand out as a Western tourist if you're coming from Europe, from the US. Catherine and I definitely felt eyes on us in the community. But that said, we also had wonderful interactions with Guatemalans. The tourist industry, an important industry, and it is just, and I can't emphasize this enough, a beautiful, beautiful country. I mean, very well worth tourism. But I think Ryan, you and I would both agree, and especially I'd be interested in hearing, because you've seen so much of this in your travels. Dig into the history and take the time to get to know what you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite parts of traveling is learning more about the history of the countries that you're visiting. And, you talk about the American banana companies or the coup. And gosh, we could do a whole episode on the School of the Americas and how America sort of, how the United States influence, so many of these countries in Latin America. We were not great neighbors, Kiernan.
I think that's a great idea for a future episode, because I'll tell you, I started to build out like a pocket history, and I just thought, if we're going to do it, we should do it right and have like a full episode on the history. So what I would encourage you, what I'll do for this episode is I'm going to link out to a good sort of quick summary. If you're not going to take the time to, or have the time to read a full book before you go to Guatemala, the Center for Justice and Accountability has a really nicely laid out summary of the kind of major eras in political turmoil. So I'll link to that. And then there's a guidebook that I'd recommend. There's a series called the Insights Guide, which are essentially history books. They're not sort of super novelistic. They're really a pretty cut and dry, just the facts of history, but they will give you a good sense of the timelines of the major actors. And they're going to do a better job of it than we can do, because we want to make sure we talk about all the sights and sounds and fun things to do along the tourist track. So I'll link to those. And you know what? I would love to, if this is a place that our listeners would love for us to deep dive into, shoot us an email, outofofficepod@gmail.com with your ideas, but just tell us you want to hear that episode, and we'll go out and we'll recruit. I would love to get a professor on to really
absolutely
dig in with both of us, especially because you and I have both seen different parts of Central and South America to talk about.
And I've actually been looking for a book that talks about that period specifically. So if folks have recommendations, please reach out, because it's not obvious to me what I should read if I want to learn about sort of the post-colonial interference in Latin America in like the mid 1900s.
Yeah, absolutely. Send the recommendation. We'll bring it here on the pod. So our trip to Guatemala began in Guatemala City. Guatemala City is actually the largest city in Central America. And Catherine and I made the, in retrospect, silly decision to fly in on New Year's Eve. And so while I had read all of these things about how important it was to make sure you're getting into a licensed cab when you land at midnight on New Year's Eve, it's pretty slim pickings at the airport.
And New Year's Eve in Latin America is a much more family-focused holiday. So it's not like there's a lot of stuff open everywhere.
Also, if you're a jumpy American, you will learn that fireworks are going off all the time between Christmas and...
You never lived in Brooklyn, so this is new for you.
And so we did have, I was already pretty highly strung because I had read so much about the crime, and we ended up getting into, an unmarked car and striking a deal to the B&B we were going to. And as we were driving through the dark streets, and I recount this because I just want folks' eyes to be open to like what you may see, because I didn't know this and it scared me a bit, was there were men draped in complete black head to toe on dark corners with enormous machine guns. And these actually were the police, which, I didn't know in the dark of night. And as we're going to, again, we weren't even going to like a major hotel chain or any like recognizable hotel. We were going to a small B&B, like a B&B that maybe had 2 rooms in a house. And, it just, the infrastructure is different there. It was very low buildings. And when you're tired and bleary eyed and you didn't get into an official taxi, there was some anxiety there, but everything turned out all right. And those armed guards, they're there because it can be dangerous, but there is, particularly in Guatemala City, a bit more of an obvious police and military presence.
Nothing makes you feel more comfortable than that.
Yeah. And in Guatemala City, it is a modern city. There's an area that's high rises. There's some great restaurants to go to. 6th Avenue is sort of the known main thoroughfare where you can see the city come to life. And that's where, if you're on the tourist track, you'll definitely be checking out. But what I would like to really underline is the museums of Guatemala City. And the cathedral, Cathedral de Guatemala that's there. Starting with the cathedral, it's just a beautiful old colonial era cathedral with a small, more modern museum. And to just start getting us into some of the creepy Catholic stuff, Ryan, I always love these saint stories. And there's a story of a saint there where apparently this nun, she was like coughing up blood as she was expiring, and the blood was going onto the tissues and forming the shape of a cross onto the tissues with her blood. I mean, just miracle of miracles. And I just know Catherine always says, "You Catholics, you just love like bodily blood and skin," and it's true.
The original body horror. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And that really comes to life as you visit monasteries, nunneries, convents, churches in Guatemala. And so you can see those bloody cross handkerchiefs in the museum behind the Cathedral de Guatemala. And it was raining quite heavily when we were visiting Guatemala City, and a lot of the shops were closed because it was New Year's Day, but the cathedral was open. So Catherine and I went to a very atmospheric mass there, and then got the creep factor back in the museum. And by the way, Catholics, if you're new listening, Ryan and I, we've got the altar boy history, Catholic Youth Organization president, so we're allowed to say it's creepy. We're in the cult. You can also visit the Palacio Nacional de la Cultura. And this is the former president's palace, and it's a really beautiful colonial architecture, and I would say a little bit whitewashed country history. This is kind of the history as the expunged of all the complicated global influences, and so you do get some lovely murals and some recounting of the history that you can get there. I would say go more for the architecture than for necessarily getting the full scope of facts. And then Catherine and I, while we ended up having to leave Guatemala City to get to Antigua and Tikal National Park and Lake Atitlan, on our way back, we made time to get to Guatemala City before our flight out. And we had a period of like 8 hours where we basically said to a taxi, if you stay with us for these 8 hours, we want to hit these 3 major museums. And the guy was like all for it. He kept our luggage in the taxi, which was super helpful. And he knew we were on a clock to get to the airport. And he like took it as his project for the day to get us to these 3 museums. And they were all spectacularly interesting. So the 3 museums are the Museo Ixchel, the Museo Miraflores, and the Museo Nacional de Arqueologia and Etnologia. And the first of those, the Ixchel, is all about textiles and village attire. And I'm not a big clothing history person or textile person. But I will say what is so interesting about this museum and very special is it goes very deeply into the weaving history of the many, many villages and cultures that are represented across Guatemala. Once you get outside of the main tourist track and the cities, there's a lot of rural communities that carry on this indigenous attire, and what you wear very much indicates where you're from. And there's, it goes back centuries in this weaving tradition. And this museum is really beautifully put together, and clearly a lot of resources invested to preserve this history as, jeans and T-shirts and things become more widely available. This is preserving that important history.
Yeah, I do love traveling in Latin America when you see these real indigenous influences that are celebrated and you can still sort of find in practice.
And the other two museums, Miraflores and the Museo Nacional de Arqueologia and Etnologia, these are focused on the Mayan history. So broader than just the textile museum, these will be, pottery, artifacts, masks. There's a famous jade mask that kind of got some play in the 80s and became like a real national symbol, and it's quite beautiful. If you only have time for one, I would recommend the Museo Miraflores, and that's because it's specifically dedicated to a Mayan site that it is built on. And in fact, there are temple mounds that some have been excavated, some not, that are directly next to the museum. And the museum has a recreation of what this major Mayan city center would have been like. And just really thoughtful displays. And, I think for those who are time limited, you can go in and really appreciate these artifacts. They're so interesting to study and look at on their own. And it just gives you a broader sense of how sophisticated of a society Mayan culture was, and the level of artistic achievement. There's a very specific Mayan style of sculpture, which really comes across too when you go to where we headed out to from Guatemala City, which is Tikal National Park.
I am so excited to hear about Tikal National Park because I know this is connected to one of your other favorite topics, which is Star Wars, right?
Yes. Not the only reason to visit, but, a plus. So Tikal National Park, you do have to take a flight there, a short flight from Guatemala City. And this was one of those places when Catherine and I knew we only had, a week and a half, 2 weeks to explore Guatemala. We were not 100% sure we could fit in Tikal. But as I researched it more and more, I just thought if we go all the way to Guatemala and we don't hit Tikal National Park, it'll be a big mistake. And that would be my headline for anybody planning a trip to Guatemala. Tikal National Park is one of the most extraordinary places I've ever visited. So it's a Mayan site in the middle of the jungle. And it used to be a thriving metropolis built between 900 and 700 BC. And it is home to 6 just incredible, breathtaking, large, ancient pyramids. And there's a great plaza around which a number of these pyramids are. And then there's a ton of hiking trails out into the jungle that you can take and see active excavations going on in some of the further out pyramids that aren't as huge as the main ones. And yes, Ryan, you mentioned the Star Wars connection. So where most folks will have seen Tikal National Park is in the very first Star Wars, Star Wars: A New Hope.
That's like the one from like the original Star Wars, or like the
very
first
original episode 4, the first ever Star Wars. The
Mark Hamill playing.
That's right.
Okay.
Who is he playing, Ryan?
Luke Skywalker.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they go to the Rebel base, which is inside what look like ancient pyramids, and they used the pyramids from Tikal National Park. It's in Yavin 4 in Star Wars world. And some people may remember spaceships are like flying in and out of these ancient pyramids, and there's like a guy way up above the canopy in the jungle who's like tracking vehicles coming in. It's a very famous shot from Star Wars. So you've got that extra kind of pop culture edge, but visit for the history before you visit for the Star Wars.
Did you dress as Luke? Like when you went and you got like Catherine to take pictures of you?
Do I always dress a little bit like Luke? Yes. I mean, I'm more of a Han guy. So, I had my black vest on and of course my blaster thigh holster. That's for the boy. That's like really.
Wait, you're like Han Solo? You're not like Han Solo.
Yeah, please. What you think I'm Luke Skywalker?
More Luke than Han, please.
I think I like to think I'm more Princess Leia than anybody. But So the Great Plaza and exploring these pyramids is and hiking around is really the main attraction here. You can actually go up onto these pyramids. They've built staircases up, and the Great Pyramid, the centerpiece, the like national symbol of Guatemala, is called the Great Jaguar. Jaguars are a super respected and religious animal for Mayan culture, and really broadly respected and seen as an important symbol for Guatemalans. And the Great Jaguar is 144 feet high. It's a lot of stairs to go up, but of course, well worth it because you get this just incredible view of the whole site itself. And, there are these, there's the canopy of trees. And when you get above it, you really just get an appreciation for the wildness. And you can imagine what this site was like before it was rediscovered and cleaned up. And there's still a lot of outlying areas in this jungle that are just being discovered. There's a technology called LIDAR, LIDAR. And LIDAR is basically a new type of radar that you can point down at jungles, rainforests, and it will detect abnormalities of the land beneath. So you get these mounds, or you get things like pyramids, building remains, ruins that are hidden beneath the jungle canopy and, endless amounts of growth below. And archaeologists are making clear, as we come to explore Central America, South America more, there are so many archaeological sites that have not been touched, and they are incredibly difficult to get to, and dangerous and arduous to actually do the excavations on. And all around Tikal, they're discovering more and more of these Mayan civilizations.
And it just seems like this city went on for forever. Like I think I was reading in the Times about this, and it's like X number of % bigger than they thought it was. It's just like an incredible find.
Yes, there's a book that I love called 1491 New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus. I'll link to it in the show notes. It gets into a lot of this, which is some historians saying, like, there's a lot about native North Americans, but it does get more broadly into the Americas. And it's exactly what you're saying, Ryan. The complexity of these societies and the infrastructure that was there. Historically, it seems that the European colonialists played down how large these populations were because they were decimated. I mean, they were either actively killed or a disease felled these societies. And, it is you visit a place like Tikal, and it is very touching if you look at it from that point of view of what a complex society was ruined. But where there are signs of hope, and this I found really interesting, was that you do have Mayan descendants who come to Tikal and they perform either religious ceremonies to honor their ancestors. These were burial pyramids. They were honoring great Mayan leaders. Or they come just for the day with their families. They're often like out having picnics. And so it's not just a tourist attraction. It means a lot to the indigenous population as well. And given the history of the Civil War and the killings of so many indigenous people, it is a small sign of hope that they have sites like this that celebrate their culture.
Yeah, absolutely. How incredible for Guatemala to be able to uncover this and hopefully turn it into, a place like Machu Picchu where people come to learn. Yeah.
Well, and also the museums in Guatemala City, again, like I think a lot of tourists come into Guatemala City just to leave to get to these other places. But like those museums, they clearly were created by people who really wanted to preserve this history and celebrate it. And I think it's incredibly important to try to make time to get to visit them. The other side of Tikal is that it's a national park. And so it is wild, meaning it is literally wild. There's great bird watching. There's great trails to hike. One mistake Catherine and I made was as you get out into Tikal, there's no ATMs there. And so you really do want to have Well, no, I mean, it's funny, but it's also like you do really want to have cash on hand because you're not able to use your credit cards easily. You can book with a credit card, of course, but we didn't get, I really wanted to do like a bird watching with a guide there. I'm not a huge birder, but it was clear we were surrounded with a lot of very special nature, and we wanted somebody to tell us about it. We didn't have enough cash on hand to hire that guide, and I still regret that. As Catherine would say, reason to go back. But we stayed at the Jungle Lodge. I would recommend this as a place to stay. Even though it's a very nice accommodation there, it is wild. They shut off the power at 10 p.m. And when I tell you, you feel that you're in the jungle, Ryan, there is as day breaks, at 4 a.m., the animals, the roar of animals in the jungle is shocking. And the main culprit of that are howler monkeys. I don't know if you've ever heard a howler monkey, Ryan.
They howl?
They don't. I wouldn't have named them howler monkeys. What they really do sounds to me more like a roar. They basically have this,
that's scary.
This inflatable little pouch in their throats that it sounds to me like what I picture a Tyrannosaurus Rex sounding like. And when you're not expecting that, oh boy, it is astounding. And I took a recording when we were in Guatemala, and I thought it would be fun just to listen to a quick audio of a howler monkey to give you a sense. So, when you're walking on a trail without a lot of people around or you're just waking up, that's, it's a cacophony.
Yeah, no, that's a nice way to wake up, though. Don't want to do that as sort of like an alarm,
And the other piece is there are spider monkeys that are up in the canopy. So it's very fun to try to spot spider monkeys. And, they're swinging with alacrity through the canopy. Very cool to see for city slickers like us.
I do love spider monkeys. They're adorable.
Where have you spotted those?
In Costa Rica.
Ah, okay. And the other animal that I would call out to keep an eye out for when you're in Tikal is called a coati, Coati. And what these are they're little mammals that travel in little packs, and they almost look like a large rodent, but they've got these long tails that they hold straight up. So you see these like almost little flags, these little groups of tails of coati going through the jungle undergrowth. It really is pretty wild. I mean, it truly is. It's great for the history. It's great for the nature. Could not recommend. If we had not gone to Tikal, oh boy, I would regret it so much.
It sounds amazing. These coatis are adorable. They're like little raccoons.
Exactly. Yeah, they do look like raccoons. So that covers Tikal National Park. I'd recommend 2 days there. Certainly you don't want to be rushed, but like once you've done the trails can all be basically covered within a day. So maybe you do half a day hiking in nature and a day devoted to exploring the ruins. And the two additional destinations we're going to cover today are Antigua and Lake Atitlan. And so after Tikal, we headed to Antigua, and we took a flight that was a small carrier whose business plan is basically they sell as many tickets as they can, and then they just call up like as many planes as they need to fulfill those tickets. And, Catherine's like a bit of a nervous flyer.
That's how Southwest does it, I think.
Catherine's a little bit of a nervous flyer. And so we were watching these planes come, and there was like a large plane and a medium plane and a small plane. And we didn't get on the large plane, and we didn't get on the medium plane. We got on a small plane. It was maybe like 20 people and two propellers, very loud. And this, I would say, is maybe the scariest flight I've ever been on. And I'm not a majorly nervous flyer, but we were flying at night, and very small, very loud. And there was a tremendous bang in the middle of the flight from the back of the plane. And the pilots seemed unaware of it because they had their earphones on, and it was very loud already. but the cabin got crazy cold, and I think maybe like a fan belt broke that like ran the like heat and air conditioning. Maybe, I'm not totally sure. We never got it resolved, but it was very scary. And what made it even a little more heightened was because it was night. You could look out of the window, and there was a volcano actively exploding. So
like a scene from Jurassic Park.
I mean, it really was like very Indiana Jones in a way. And felt very wild. I look back on it fondly, but in the moment it was scary. But we landed just fine. But that does raise Antigua is very close to volcanoes, and it's an area that experiences earthquakes, and Guatemala itself has experienced many, many earthquakes in its history. But the reason that it's especially interesting with Antigua is that before Guatemala City was the capital, Antigua was the capital. And it was, as a result, it has tons of beautiful colonial architecture, and it's quite a low built city. So, very few things are stretching above 3 or 4 stories. And a 1773 earthquake shook the town so hard, destroyed so much of what was there, that everyone kind of looked around and went, maybe we want to move the capital city a little further from the fault lines and the volcanoes. And so today, the Colonial Center is actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and incredibly rich in convents, churches, monasteries, parks. It's the buildings are painted really bright colors. There's this shade of yellow that I very much associate in my memory with Antigua, and just a lot of great places to visit. There's ruins of a cathedral that are very atmospheric. And the sort of symbol of the city is called the Santa Catalina Arch, and it was built in 1694. And it's now they're underneath it. If you're trying to find it, is the Calle del Arco, which is the Arch Street. And the reason that it stretches above is because this arch is a bridge that actually connected a convent and a school. And what's interesting about this is the convent was cloistered. So these nuns, in order to get to the school and to the church, needed to actually cross the city street, but they couldn't. Yeah, they couldn't go out in the street. Interact with the populace. Exactly.
Right. So they built this. I like so this is convenient.
It's very convenient, and it's very beautiful as well. And you'll get postcards of it, and it's how you're in Antigua.
At St. Francis de Sales, they just let the nuns walk right across the parking lot like anybody else.
Exactly. But, it reminds me, there's a very early episode of Out of Office in a very poor audio quality when I had on the authors of a book called Room with a Pew, and it's about convents and monasteries in
Sounds
Spain.
Like a memoir from hell.
And they talk about some of these cloistered convents that have guest rooms you can rent, and you sit at a table and the food just appears through a lazy Susan that goes into the wall, and there's cloistered nuns on the other side. So
they're currently cloistered nuns. That's fun. I've never stayed in an active monastery.
They're in the world. There are currently cloistered nuns.
No, I know. I mean, these nuns like rent out rooms on Airbnb.
There. In Spain, they do. Here, that is not the case in Antigua. But it gives you a sense of how strong the Catholicism was in this place. And of course, Catholicism was a major tool of the Spanish government as they were taking over so much of Central and South America. And you get a great sense of that as you explore these monasteries. The richest monastery in town that you should definitely visit is called Santo Domingo. Big courtyard that you want to visit, and there's all of these places have a lot of crosses and what else? Crosses and all the accoutrement of masses. And, they stretch back hundreds of years all the way to today. There's vestments. Some of them are kitted out with dummies that are dressed like nuns and monks who showing you what their lives were like. One that I would really recommend also is visiting the Convento de las Capuchinas. This was a major convent, but it has a courtyard with a really beautiful fountain in the center. And it's surrounded by the cells that the nuns used to live in. There were only 28 nuns that lived there. And you get to see how very strict their life was. These wooden beds and, just like no comforts, and really all about just devotion to the church.
Did it ever make you feel jealous? No Wi-Fi, no email, just vibes.
Well, it kind of depends what vibes you're into, I would say, because it's when your vibes are just like walking around and thinking about how sinful you are, I don't know, it can kind of go in either direction.
That seems like something that you've done before, though. That's not new
it's
to
true.
you.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And many of these convents and monasteries, what they'll do is they'll kind of preserve the architecture, the fountains, the courtyards for you to explore, and then a few rooms are devoted to these like more museum displays. And so they're usually pretty fast to get through. And I would say, devoting a day and a half just to exploring the churches, cathedrals, and monasteries and convents, that's really a major part of what you're there to do. You can also take a 30-minute hike out of the city to go explore a giant stone cross that is a pretty common tourist attraction, because you climb up into the hills above Antigua and you get a great view back. So it's very easy for you to spot the way. I have read, I didn't see this, but I have read that like pickpocketing, because this is such a tourist destination, can be a problem there. I didn't encounter that, and it is well worth it for the view. So I would say take time to hike up to the giant stone cross. And there is also a sculpture garden featuring these pretty whimsical, interesting sculptures by an artist whose name is Efrain Recinos, also known as Santo Domingo del Cerro. And it's a cool sculpture garden. Again, it's like you're probably going to want to get a tuk-tuk. You know what a tuk-tuk is, Ryan?
I know a tuk-tuk.
Okay, I don't know if everyone listening knows a tuk-tuk, but they're basically kind of almost go-karty. They're like the little 3 or 4 wheeled conveyances that usually have a vinyl top that'll zip you all over these cities. Antigua is a great place to get around by tuk-tuk, and they can take you up to these sculpture gardens. And it's kind of like the equivalent of what a taxi would be there.
Yeah, except a little more exciting than a taxi.
Yeah. And Catherine and I also did do a volcano hike. We went to Pacaya Volcano. You hire a guide. You can do it through your hotel. It's an active volcano. I did have the misunderstanding that we would go to the top. Like I had dreams of going and looking down into a bed of lava. That's not what's going to happen. You just hike up towards the summit. But it's a good hike and a good way to stretch your legs. And our guide brought marshmallows because the ground beneath you is warm with volcanic activity. And so if you find an indentation, it can be warm enough to roast a marshmallow, which we did. But you do also, by the way, want to have good hiking boots if you're going to do this, because you just
the ground's warm.
I would be very worried with a cheap set of sneakers.
Yeah. I love the idea of just like cooking an egg right there. I would have brought eggs over. Yeah.
And then from Antigua, we headed to Lake Atitlan. And Lake Atitlan is even more than Tikal National Park. This might be the most touristed place in Guatemala. There's like this history that there's this association I've seen with like yoga culture, that this is like a very spiritual place to go, Lake Atitlan. We took a van there. It's only 30 miles as the crow flies from Antigua, but the roads are so poorly maintained and have to go through a very bumpy, like hilly area that it takes 4 hours to get between the two. So you do need to plan half a day to get to Lake Atitlan. And at Lake Atitlan, as its name suggests, it is an absolutely breathtakingly gorgeous, huge lake that is bordered by hills and volcanoes. And so you're going to take in a lot of nature. There's a lot of good walks to do there. And the main tourist town is called Panahakel, which everyone calls Pana, P-A-N-A. And it's touristy. It's very touristy. You may want to just grab some food there. If you want really trinkety souvenirs that are going to fall apart, that's the place to get them. A lot of hotels there. But you're going to be in tourist central. And the thing to do is you you negotiate to get a boat to bring you to some of the outlying villages that are around Lake Atitlan. And so we went to a pretty rural town called Santiago. Not exactly rural, but it's like a genuine kind of village there. Obviously, they get tourists, but it doesn't have a tremendous amount of tourist infrastructure, called Santiago. And what I like about visiting Santiago is that you get these great views back across the lake onto a volcano called San Pedro volcano. And there's markets, and the people who live in Santiago are selling goods that you might be interested in. But there is a church there that you can visit as well. But Ryan, the main thing you want to visit in Santiago is a complicated story. It's somebody named Maximon. Have you ever heard of Maximon?
The saint? No, I haven't. No saintin'?
So what? Maximon is complicated. I see you reading ahead in the script.
Yeah. No, I'm confused.
Okay, so in Santiago, there's something called a cofradia, which is basically like a ceremonial house. And in this ceremonial house, there are a gathering of elders of the community who sit there most days tending to a statue of this figure called Maximon. And Maximon is draped in these great colorful textiles, and he has a giant cigar in his mouth, and he wears a kind of a Stetson-y cowboy hat. And Maximon is, it depends who you ask. To some people, he's a Catholic saint. To others, he's a folk hero. To others, he's a representative of Satan. But he is sort of this figure, this folktale hero. He's kind of a legend that really embodies this mix of Catholic traditions and pre-colonial Mayan culture. And you get these mixed stories about who exactly is. Some say it's Saint Maximon and that he represents the church. But truthfully, if he's a saint, he's the baddest saint I know, because he's always smoking. He's known for his cigarettes and cigars. And when you go into this ceremonial house, he's surrounded by candles and bottles of booze, a lot of grain alcohol going in. And as a tourist, I'll link in the show notes to a kind of a guide if you're going to visit. You got to be ready to leave some money as an offering to Maximon, and also thus to the local community, because this is kind of a tourist attraction. But there also is this religious feeling about Maximon. There are some very colorful stories about the legend of Maximon. Again, if we get a historian on, I would love to talk more deeply about Maximon. We could have a whole Maximon episode. But my favorite legend about him is that Maximon was a man who was hired by local fishermen in Santiago and these outlying areas around Lake Atitlan to make sure that when the men were away and fishing for their livelihood, that Maximon was in charge of protecting the purity of all the women that remained in the village while the men were away. And instead, what Maximon did was he disguised himself and he slept with all the women. That was the story of Maximon. So Maximon,
that's scoundrel.
He's a trickster. I think if I could articulate myself from what I've learned about Maximon, he's a bit of a trickster god. And
he's getting people to bring him offerings or his whole afterlife. So he figured it out.
Bad. It's not bad. And I did years later. There's a great there's a local store in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where the proprietors go out and they travel extensively throughout the year, and then they bring back like local goods that they've sourced. And one day I was in there and I said to the owner, "Is that Maximon?" And she said, "Oh my God, you've been to Guatemala." And I liked it so much, I bought it. And there's a giant cigarette that you put in his mouth. I'll post it on the Instagram.
Oh my God, you have a Maximon? That you bought in Boston.
Well, it was, I didn't see a Maximon when I was in Santiago. It's at OOO podcast on Instagram if you want to see my Maximon. Which
you should post a whole photo dump of this trip
for sure. But you got to visit Maximon. Go to Santiago and visit Maximon. And I would also make a recommendation. You know, one thing is that the U.S. dollar goes quite far in Guatemala, and so we were often staying like in the more touristy centers, but we stayed in a hotel I really liked here called Hotel Atitlan, like Lake Atitlan, Hotel Atitlan. And what I found so amazing about it, Ryan, was it was covered, absolutely covered. Every surface you could imagine had this great Catholic religious art all over the place. And I love the saint statues that are made in Guatemala. I did buy one when I was there. I bought a St. Francis. I'll post a picture of that too. And it's just it's a much more kind of upbeat, colorful Catholicism than I think like you and I were used to, the like dark Irish, sinful Catholicism. Colorful textiles, really almost like cartoonishly painted saints in bright colors. And, you know, they almost have this kind of superhero quality of them. In fact, in Charlie's bedroom, I have one up on the wall of Saint Ficra. And Saint Ficra is the patron saint of gardeners. And this is a representative of Guatemalan sculptures. And he has this big shovel and this bright orange tunic on. And Charlie grew up calling him Shovel Man, which I always thought was very funny. So anyway, I love the Guatemalan Catholic art, and Hotel Atitlan had it everywhere. And I found that really charming. I have a ton of pics of that. So yeah, I'll make sure to load up the Instagram this week.
I'm looking forward to that.
So that's our pen portrait of your first trip to Guatemala, Ryan. I just can't wait for you to do a follow-up when you get a chance to visit. You know, we did Guatemala City, Tikal, Antigua, and finished it up at the absolutely breathtakingly beautiful Lake Atitlan.
Well, I think that was quite a trip, and I think it's time for the last stop.
The last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
This is the last segment of the show. It's in the name there, the last stop. It's my favorite segment. It's your favorite segment. It's popularly known as the People's segment because it's the most democratic of the segments, because we come together as a community to share, to pass around anything. It could be a memory, it could be a piece of gear, it could be an article, a picture, a recommendation. But it must inspire the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. So Ryan, I'm in the middle of a workaday week. I'm hoping you can inspire my wanderlust. Did you bring a last stop this week?
I did. This website called Chef's Pencil, which
I just want to point out, you didn't say I did Kiernan, which I think of as one of your catchphrases. I did Kiernan. I've always thought whenever we start doing T-shirts, I did Kiernan might go on the back of one.
I did Kiernan.
Do tell.
This website called Chef's Pencil has run this really fun experiment. They've taken the menus of all 3,517 Michelin star restaurants, and they ran them through an algorithm to figure out what cities can you get the best bang for your buck for Michelin star dining, and which cities are the most expensive. So, Kiernan, just knowing what you know, what do you think the most expensive city is to dine in at a Michelin star restaurant? Or most expensive country?
I guess New York or London, I would guess.
Denmark.
Oh, Oh, I mean, sure. Yeah. Because you've got Noma. And
Right.
It's like, yeah. And those are insanely expensive.
Yeah. So Denmark is the only one above 300 US. But
Wow.
the most expensive are Denmark, Hong Kong, and Iceland. And the least expensive are Vietnam, Brazil, and Malta.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, I've gotten to Vietnam. You've gotten to Brazil. So we got to get to
no,
Malta.
I've never been to Brazil, famously.
Oh my God, you haven't gone to Brazil yet?
No, remember they wouldn't let me in. That's Brazil.
Oh,
Yeah.
Of course. Oh God,
Yeah.
what episode did we tell that story on? That's the best.
That's a classic.
Oh my God, Brian getting detained.
That's the worst. But I do love this list, and I'd love to go to Vietnam. It's so high on my list.
Speaking of future episodes we got to do, I have so much to say on Vietnam. Let's get that one in the next few weeks.
Yeah, so link in the show notes to this article, but it's a lot of fun visualizations about the global dining scene in the 41 countries that Michelin is active.
Really neat. We could put a couple of these up on the show notes and put this. We could put up a couple of these up on the Instagram too.
Definitely. Kiernan, did you bring a last stop this week?
I did. Oh my God. This last stop, this is one of the most practical things I can think of incorporating here. It's so amazing. I can't believe I never knew about it. I'm a white noise guy. I don't know if you are a white noise guy. I need a little background noise to sleep.
Yeah, I don't mind a little bit. I mean, I usually listen to podcasts, usually this podcast, but
thanks. Mostly my interviews, right?
Yeah.
So, I really need like a white noise to sleep. Silence is difficult for me. And so when I'm in hotels and things, I'm always leaving a fan on. In fact, I have been known to hack the thermostat system where they have automatic fan shutoffs. There's a way you can go in, you can take the cover off if you carry a little screwdriver with you, and you can reprogram it to keep the fan running all night. I've done that. Okay, that's how nuts I am about white noise machines.
Yeah.
And my kids sleep with white noise machines, and so I've gotten used to traveling with them. But I've discovered, so Wirecutter had an amazing article about things that your iPhone can do that you didn't realize. And one piece of it is something that is built in that you don't need to download anything to make it work, is a white noise machine. So you go into your settings, you select accessibility, you select audio and visual, and you select background sounds. And there is a whole menu of ocean, rain, dark noise, stream. So you don't have to worry about your phone shutting off and, your YouTube white noise video failing to play through the night. You've got a white noise machine. It is built right into your iPhone. I don't know why they don't tell us this more openly.
I had no idea there was a white noise automatically built in. People download whole apps for that.
I've downloaded these things, but I'm going to say it again. Take your iPhone out, go to settings, accessibility, then audio and visual, then background sounds. Boom, turn it on. You have an instant sound machine. It's for someone like me who needs that noise. It's a game changer.
Well, that is good to know. There's also this podcast, which we're happy to
Sure,
put you to
it would
sleep.
be great if you just left it on all night. It would really help the download.
We could do one of these episodes.
You want to do ASMR? ASMR. Yeah. Oh, ASMR travel is a really great idea.
That could be a hit. That could be what we're looking for, the angle we're looking for.
That might actually be the niche. What if we took all of Rick Steves' content and we just whispered it? I could read out the guides in whisper.
Oh, it's so creepy.
Now, Ryan, on that creepy note, I want to ask you, what are we talking about next week?
So next week, we are going to interview a friend of mine who is a flight attendant, and we're not going to tell you where she's a flight attendant, what airline, because she's going to, tell she's going to gossip. We're going to gossip with
flight attendant tell all.
Yeah, exactly. So that'll be fun. Maybe not
I've
safe
seen
for work.
Articles like this come out now and then, but I've always wanted to get someone on the show to talk about it, to really answer the hard questions.
Yeah. So looking forward to diving in with, we have to figure out what her fake name's going to be, but something cool. So more on that.
So tune in to hear what fake name Ryan's flight attendant friend has.
Until then, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.